Some love running. Some hate it. Some are just starting. Some have been running since they took their first steps. Some think running is the most natural form of movement there is. Some think it's demanding, hard, and takes everything they have. Some run fast. Some run far. Some run for fun. Some run because it's an obsession. Some run because they want to get fitter, lose weight, or feel energized. Some run because they want to beat their opponents, their personal best, or win a race. Everyone is different, but everyone is a runner. The question is, which kind of runner are you? Find out April 2022.
Run. Run more. Run faster. Run stronger. Run hard. You better run.
Hello runners, welcome to this virtual run clinic brought to you by Polo. Our virtual run clinics bring you the very best advice from world-leading experts to help you enjoy every run and beat your best. You might be joining us today through our sponsored events. Maybe you've signed up to finish the Gold Coast Marathon. We're so excited to be sponsoring this amazing event again in 2022. You could be an off-roader, part of the fantastic Into Adventure community, or you may have heard our latest announcement that we have now added parkrun to the Polo family. So whether you're a first-time runner or looking to achieve your best pace, this series will bring you a ton of insights and practical advice. For those of you new to Polo, we create world-leading running watches, fitness watches, and heart rate monitors. For over 40 years, Polo has helped millions of people to get started on their fitness journey and fall in love with running. In addition to today's content, we're bringing you a one-stop resource hub by way of the Polo Running Club. It's where you'll find all our best resources, including running plans, training tips, special offers on running watches, and when you sign up to the Polo Running Club, you'll also go into the draw to win a free running watch every month, and you'll also get access to recording for this webinar. So if you haven't already, register by the link on the screen and get access today. Now let me introduce you to your Polo team here today. We have Ross Dougal, Channel Manager for Sport in Australia and New Zealand, and our resident sports scientist, John Easdown. They'll be helping to guide us through the webinar today, so I'd like to pass across to Ross to kick us off with the series and to introduce our very special guest.
Thanks, Kylie, and also to everyone who is joining us for the start of the series. We know you'll take a lot out of the content and what our experts have to share for your own running journey. If you've signed up for the series, we've got 3 great sessions coming your way. Today, we're with Benita Willis looking at how to design your ultimate running training plans. Then followed by Brad Bear on the 30th of March, and we're looking at recovery mastery for runners so that you can get the most out of your training. And then on the 13th of April, we're with Danielle DiFrancesco looking at training and race nutrition for runners so that you can not only get the most out of your training sessions, but also prepare well for an important race day. If you have signed up for this session, then the next will come automatically to you. You just need to keep a lookout for the reminders in your inbox. Today, we're going to look at creating the ultimate running plan for you. We've had a lot of feedback from the running community over the years, and creating a running plan is one of the hottest topics. We're going to start, importantly, with some of the things you need to consider before getting into a lot of that training. And as everybody is different and their running background is different, it's really important to try and understand where's the best place that you can start. And we're going to then have a look into the essential running phases of a running program and some of the key workouts within that. and then actually go into some of the specific distances. So 5, 10, 21, and the 42K. We'll have a look at how some of those workouts drill all the way down into those distances. And then we're going to come back and have a look at some of the most common running questions. So we hope you get a lot out of the content today. And do know that it is live Q&A throughout. So if you do have your running questions, please make sure you get them into the chat right from now. And to help expertly guide us through the first session of the series, we are very excited and privileged to have Benita Willis with us. Benita is one of Australia's running greats. She is a 4-time Olympian, a world cross-country champion, 26 times Australian representative and multiple record holder, and also the director and coach at Lace Up Running. Benita, thank you so much for joining us. We're really looking forward to having a chat about running training programs.
Thanks for having me, and it's great to have a bit more of a chat about running again this year.
One of the key things we'd like to get out of the session is to help everybody understand, look, what's a really good starting point for their training? So I'd love to ask you, look, what should people consider before starting their running training plan?
It's a good question with the distances that you want to do. If you're new to running, you probably should look at 5K as your distance. And I do beginner running programs within my business in Lace Up Running. And it's walk, jog for about a month before you're running 20, 25 minutes. So you've really got to take it slow at first. If you're an intermediate level or an advanced level and you've been running for a while, you could consider doing an event like 10K or the half marathon. And they're very challenging still. So you've really got to have been running a little bit over summer to be considering doing those sorts of races. And then marathon is for very experienced runners or people that have already done a half marathon before, or if you've done ultras before. So really a marathon is sort of a bit of a different event to the other three. But obviously you've got to consider health factors as well. If you haven't exercised for many, many years, like it could be good to see a doctor just to make sure you're okay. The key things are to make sure that you're hydrated before you start. Don't do too much too quickly. Make sure you've got some good shoes, have something good like a polar watch to time stuff, or check your heart rate. Like a lot of people that are new to running, you might find that your heart rate just is through the roof as soon as you start jogging. And you really need to start with the walk jog program first. So the aim is not to exert yourself and hate it after the first run. Like you don't want to go and try to run a 5K straight up if you've never done 5K before or you haven't run for many years. Like you've got to really take it gradually. So I think there's lots of different factors, even clothing that you're going to wear as well. Things like that make you feel good when you're going to get out there and do a bit of a run. I also think sometimes it's great to have a look at the different running groups in your area and join a running group or get someone to coach you, whether that's online or through the running group. Probably a lot of different things to consider. Running is a very hard sport in the first few months if you haven't run for a while. It is going to be hard at first, but there's so many things that you can get out of running and you always feel good when you've done a run. So it's one of those things that you've got to weigh up how you're going to feel at the end to how you feel when you get out the door. And sometimes it's getting out the door that's the hardest part for someone that's new to running.
It's so important to get the running starting point right. As we see, Benita, in the first couple of months, it's very easy for people to do a bit too much volume or to start pushing too hard and then often pick up an injury, which really derails the running effort and it can be very demoralising. Can you help talk us through where it's best for somebody to try and work out where they should start?
A beginner, I would say it's someone that's either never run before or you haven't run for a number of years and you're sort of looking to take it up and get back into it. So a beginner is really someone that thinks, I want to try running again or want to try running for the first time. And really the number of times per week you run as a beginner depends on a few factors. Like age is a bit of a factor. So if you're a bit older, you probably need to be a bit more gradual with your program than if you were, say, in your 20s, because we know that people in their 20s, they're less susceptible to injury. So you probably can get away with running a few more days a week. So I would say beginners 2 to 3 days a week of a run walk program initially. And that could be 1 minute jog, 5 minute walk times 5 or something like that. So you're only really running 5 minutes of running, but the total time of exercise is 30 minutes. So that could be your first thing that you do. So if you're a beginner, don't try to run for 30 minutes straight up in your first run because it's probably going to get you injured or you're going to hate it. And so you've just got to be really gradual. And beginners should really look at sort of shorter distance races first. And then once you've conquered a shorter distance race, then you go on to longer distance races. So if you're a beginner, don't look at training for the marathon straight up. I would go 5K or 10K at the most. And then once you've conquered that, then you progress to the next level. An intermediate runner is someone that has run a bit. Maybe you've run a few times a week over the summer and you run with your mates sometimes, but you don't train consistently. And you can probably run 5K to 10K without stopping. So those sort of people, I would be looking at running probably 3 to 4 times a week. And intermediate runners, you could try little sessions. Like you could do an interval session that could be something like 4 times 2 minutes hard, 2 minutes easy at about 5K pace, or a little bit faster in the last one. You could try little hill sessions. You could try little sessions just 1 a week, but I wouldn't be running more than 4 times a week. People at that intermediate level, you might have done a 5K or 10K race before. You could step up to the half marathon, but I'd probably say around 10K is probably a good one for you to be focusing on. And intermediate people, when you're at the intermediate level, you can progress on to be at the advanced level if you just get your training a little bit more consistent and you progressively build up your volume. So people at the intermediate level, you're on your way to probably going to events that are a bit longer than 10K in the future, but you've really got to still make sure you don't train too many times a week. So 3 to 4 times a week. And then advanced level people, I would say that's someone that has been training consistently for a number of years. You get out there, you've done a few half marathons, you've probably done some marathons, you might have done some ultras, or you've competed quite at a high level in, say, 5K, 10K sort of events. So you're the sort of person that could look at a marathon, and I would be training for advanced 5 to 6 times per week. And if you're an advanced runner, you've got to factor in your work, as all runners do, your work, your family commitments, all those other things outside of the training you're already doing. So you've got to make sure that you've got a good program. If you're running 6 times a week, you've got to really make sure that you know you might be doing a couple of sessions a week, like you might be doing an interval run, a tempo run, a long run to get ready for whatever you're training for. But you could look at longer distance races if you're at that sort of advanced level. And look, some advanced runners run 7 times a week, and some advanced runners do a few double days, but that really has to depend on your age, what you're training for, what your running history is, what your work life is like. If you're an advanced runner, there's so many factors going into your program, and it's quite a bit more complicated than someone that's just a beginner runner and you're just starting out. A really good strength program, if you can get in 1 to 2 sessions a week, that's like 15 to 20 minutes, and just really basic stuff like squats, walking lunges, tricep dips, things that you can do with your body weight, static holds, things like that. That is really good to do. But then the other cross training that I do set people is riding a mountain bike, or it depends on what you like to do. So I don't set people cross training that they don't like. A lot of people don't like swimming, so I don't set swimming. But things like swimming, water running, riding a bike, can be a stationary bike, or a lot of people like to ride outside on the trails, elliptical. There's so many different things, and it can help supplement a good running program if it's needed.
And now we're going to have a look at one of the major things that impacts running performance. And this has got a lot to do with planning. Benita, can you take us through the key phases of the training programs and help us understand what we should be doing and when?
With running programs, you've got to have a look at the year as a whole. And so if you're training for an event that's 12 weeks away, you've got to really think about what you were doing in the past 3 months before that event. So the base phase, that's what you've been doing over summer, even from like October last year, and just building that aerobic conditioning. So if you're looking at races in, say, July this year, you want to have been running a lot over our summer and even a bit earlier, just before the summer started. So that's sort of the base phase. And then I would say the build phase, like with the marathon, I would look at a build phase of about 12 weeks. So you really want to have a bit of a break. Like I always think you should have at least a week off or a week easy between these phases. And sometimes you could have like a race, you could do a half marathon. If you're training for a marathon, you could do a half marathon at the end of your base phase for a bit of a hit out, have a week easy, and then you start the marathon prep if that's what you're doing. And we look at that as the build phase. And in that phase, we're doing interval sessions, we're doing tempo runs, but within that phase, we're also doing specific efforts. So specific runs could be long runs that are at marathon pace. So they could be something like 3 to 4 times 5K, that's at marathon pace, a 2-minute jog or something like that. And that's sort of what you do maybe 5 weeks out or something. So you sort of build gradually to things like that. So if you're training for the marathon, you need to do a lot of running at marathon pace, but you don't need to run a marathon at your marathon pace. So you need to work that into your training. So when you get into the race, you're so comfortable with that pace that you know what it feels like and you know you can do it. But we don't want to train so hard that you get to the race and you're tired and you've trained too hard. I mean, I've made that mistake before as an athlete. I probably trained a bit too hard I trained for my first marathon actually, and I probably ran my marathon 5 weeks before the actual marathon. So I probably trained a bit too hard. I had a really good long run that I went a bit too hard in, and I didn't quite recover before race day. So it can put you in a bit of a hole. Between 3 and 5 weeks out, you've got to be really careful that you don't put yourself into a hole. If you're feeling good and you want to run harder than what you should, don't do it. Save it for the race day. But I always think too, in a marathon prep, as part of specific prep in that build phase, look at doing a half marathon that's 3 to 5 weeks out, where you're running some of it at marathon pace and then the last little bit slightly faster. So you're not going flat out, but you're practicing your gels, your drinks, you're in a race situation, you're running on the road, and you're sort of getting that pounding in your legs, practicing for what you're going to do in the near future. And most people I work with, they've always got some sort of a half marathon, or if you don't have a race, you could do a 20K effort in training as sort of a little bit of a hit out. So some people I coach don't like racing much and they still run really well in the marathon. So you've got to work with what you want to do and what makes you feel comfortable in your prep. And then we look at a taper phase in the marathon prep, and the taper phase probably begins about 3 weeks out, but very gradual. And I use a different taper for different people. So some people, quite an aggressive taper in the last week. So the last week before a marathon, it might only be 3 to 4 jogs of 30 minutes, and one of them might be a light session that's 10 minutes at marathon pace with a few 30-second strides afterwards. So that might be 3 to 5 days out from the marathon, and that's all I do that week. So a few rest days in there, whereas other people like to not taper quite as much. But you've really got to look at 3 weeks before the race and looking at gradually decreasing volume and intensity. If you normally do a session that's 8 times a K on a Tuesday, in that taper phase, you might be doing 6 times a K. So you can still do the same sorts of sessions, but just decrease the intensity. And if you normally run 2 hours 20 on Sundays, you've got to go down to 1 hour 45, or the week before the race, I would only go 60 to 70 minutes. So you've got to really go down in volume as well. Really trying to increase your aerobic conditioning. Look, a base phase is just about running a lot, not being too focused. You want to be focused, but you can't be focused 12 months a year on your goal. So it's sort of just about building that mileage. So when you get to the build phase, you're comfortable with the mileage, you're able to handle it, but you haven't trained so hard that you're not ready to go when it really matters. So those 12 weeks before your race, that's when you've got to start really making sure that you're focused and doing all the right things with your recovery and nutrition and hydration and stuff like that, and rest. So the base phase, I think, is very important, and it's a bit overlooked because often in a base phase, we don't race much. We're just training. And I know when I was an athlete, the base phase for me when I was living in Europe was through winter, but for us, it's really through our summer here. And you've just got to get that hard training done week in, week out, but not be too focused on anything in particular. But then the build phase is really fun because once you get into that, that's when you're sort of dialing down on paces, looking at your goal race. You might do a few lead-up races. It is really good to have some little lead-up races or hit-outs within your prep because we can't just train hard for 12 weeks. So you need to have weeks where you're not training quite as hard because you're doing a race. So you're not tapering for the race that you're doing within your prep. It's part of training, but you're decreasing the mileage a little bit. And that's really good to help your body recover from those really high mileage weeks. It is very important to not get stuck on, I've got to run X amount of mileage each week for X amount of weeks. That's not how running works. Like for anyone that I coach, if you're training for a half marathon and you do a 10K on a Sunday, then you'll do a long run on Tuesday. So don't always think that Tuesday's a session, because if you do a race on Sunday, you can't do an interval session on Tuesday. They're too close together. So you've got to really make sure that the training's structured around the intensity of what you're doing. And if you're in a marathon prep, it's even more important to not put too much intensity in there too close together, because that can make you really tired, especially if you're running fairly high mileage. And the taper phase, look, 2 to 3 weeks out, it's different for everyone. A lot of runners hate the taper phase because they just want to train hard and they hate taking rest days. They hate feeling like they're heavy. A lot of marathon runners say they feel heavy in the week before a marathon. But look, that's fine because you're carb loading and it's giving you that energy that you need when you get into your race. So you've got to really have that confidence to know that you're doing the right thing. Tapering is quite hard, but I generally think tapering, you're best off staying in the same sort of routine with the training that you're doing, but cutting the intensity and volume. So keep the similar running days, except for the last week before a marathon especially, because I would maybe take out a few runs, maybe have a few more rest days. But very low intensity that last week is really important.
Thank you so much for that, Benita. That's a huge help. Could you now take us through some of the key running workouts that you'd expect to see across those phases?
The key sessions that I use in these phases, I use these sessions within all phases. Easy runs, they're really important because they're the runs that sort of make up the volume of your week. And a lot of people tend to do easy runs too fast. So people I coach, I might say slower than 5:45 pace, or keep your heart rate below 130 or something like that, because some people, they think they're not training properly if they don't feel like they're going hard every day. If you're fairly new to running, you might think you've got to run hard all the time, and that's not going to get you the best results. So the easy runs are really important, and it's really important that you go easy. And sometimes that means running by yourself, because sometimes if you're running with a lot of people, you tend to sort of go a bit too fast. But at the same time, it's actually more fun often to do your long run with people. So you just got to sort of monitor that yourself and be smart with the easy runs. The next one is the long run, and this is the longest run of your week. Usually people do on Sunday. Some people that I coach for marathons, they might have some marathon-paced efforts within a long run, and that's probably every few weeks. And then the next week, the long run's just nice and easy. So you can vary long runs around with what you're doing. Usually if someone's training for 5K, 10K or half marathon and they're intermediate or advanced levels, the long run's just nice and easy. And that could gradually increase in volume over time as you get more into your running and more into your program. So generally the build phase to long runs are the longest. And there might be a 4-week block in that build phase where it has quite a few long runs. And then when you taper off, the long runs start decreasing in volume. But usually by the number of long runs people have done, even through the base phase, that's often an indicator of how fit they are. If you're consistent with them, that is a really good sign of your base fitness. So don't miss the long runs. If I was going to miss a session or miss something, I'd miss the easy runs or even a hard run. But long runs are really important to get in each week. And then tempo runs, they're really important as well, and they're a great addition to any program. And often people miss tempo runs. So they do interval sessions and they do their long run and they miss a tempo run. And that tempo run, if you're training for a marathon, the pace can vary from half marathon pace to slightly quicker to slightly slower. And it's usually between 20 and 30 minutes of solid running, but it shouldn't be something where you stop and you can't do a little bit more. Interval sessions, often you finish and you stop and they're pretty hard. You could maybe do one more rep. I don't like people doing sessions where they stop and they're absolutely hammered for like days afterwards. So tempo runs should feel fairly good when you finish. Like you've trained hard, but probably not as hard as an interval session. That's really working your heart, those tempo runs, and just really working that aerobic conditioning. It's so important for endurance running. Like that aerobic conditioning, how you run in the second half of your races often depends on the tempo work that you've been doing for many months before your actual big race. So they're really important not to miss. So interval sessions are good. Intervals can be hills. They could be 1K reps, mile reps. They could be 2K reps. They could be 400 reps if you're a 5K runner. So intervals have a really good place in your program, and they could be on the track. A lot of people love doing intervals on the track. A lot of people hate the track, so they might do them on the road. They might do them on the grass. People that are a bit susceptible to injury, I like to say sometimes to do grass sessions, and I think that's really important, especially in the base phase. Grass sessions are really important. But as we get into our build phase of what we're training for, it is important to be specific with the surface that you're training for as well. So sometimes interval sessions could be on the road when you're doing a marathon, or could be on the track if you're doing something like 5K on the track, which not many of us do, but interval sessions on the track are really important for that. But track sessions are fun, and a lot of people don't do track much anymore, so they're really cool to add in as interval sessions. That's probably what I would look at in a program, and then vary everything around too. So I always vary the different sessions around and look at different length reps in tempo runs. Putting in paces or putting in heart rate is a really good way to track how you're going. You've got to really make sure that you're on top of things. And sometimes if you're a little bit tired, check your heart rate when you start. And if your heart rate's a bit higher, then you run a bit slower in your tempo run. So it is really important that you can monitor everything, and that's having a good watch. Look, I've got the Polar watch, but having a good watch is really good to monitor how you're going and how you're feeling even, and what you should be doing in sessions.
What's great about this session is that we've got so many runners who are looking at different distances. So what we'd like to do now is kick into the specific workouts that you'd expect to see across the 5K, the 10K, the half marathon and the marathon. but importantly, getting the starting points right and then having a look at some of the actual workouts that are relevant for those distances. Benita, could you kick us off with having a look at the 5K? So what are some of the key workouts that you'd expect for the levels that we've talked about?
With the 5K, if you're a beginner runner, I would just be looking at doing the 5K and not worrying about what time you do, just completing it and getting to that walk jog program, completing that in a month, and then do your 5K in a month, and then you might move on to more of an intermediate level. But if you're an intermediate 5K runner, maybe 4 runs a week. The long run could be anywhere from 40 minutes to 60 minutes. Very hard to say because everyone's different. We're all different ages. We've got different backgrounds. So it's very hard. Everyone has specific requirements of how I would program your training. But as a rough guide, about 40 to 60 minutes. So, you want to be running a lot longer than 5K, but maybe only 10K at the most, or your long run could be about 8K. It's very hard to say exactly, but it should be longer than 5K. And then you'd probably only do 1 session a week. Or do 2 sessions a week if you're more advanced. So your 1 session could be something like 3 times a K or something like that with 2 minutes jog recovery or 2 minutes standing recovery. And those K reps, we're looking at maybe the second rep 5K pace and the first and third rep a bit faster. But if you're an advanced 5K runner, we're probably looking at something like 6 times a K, where some of them are at 10K pace, some of them are at 5K pace or a little bit faster. So you're really targeting some reps to be a bit faster with a 90-second jog recovery. Tempo run, for an intermediate person, I'd probably only have 1 session a week. So 1 week it could be a tempo run, 1 week it could be an interval session, and then the other session could just be a jog. Because really, if you're still intermediate, you're probably only running 4 times a week. And if you're advanced, that's when you can start getting into 2 sessions. So the tempo run example for a 5K runner could be anything like 500 metres on, 500 metres off, where it's sort of a float. So you do 500 metres more at 10K half marathon sort of pace and then 500 metres relaxed and continue like that for 6K or something. It's very hard to say. You could do something like 3 times 8-minute efforts with 2-minute jog recoveries. This is for an advanced person where you're sort of varying the paces around within each 8 minutes. So you might go 3 minutes at half marathon pace, 2 minutes in the middle faster, then 3 minutes back to half marathon pace, and then slow jog recovery. So tempo runs, you could just do 2 of them or 3 of them. Like, they're really focusing on working your heart, but it's very hard for me to say exactly what you should be doing because I don't know your age and those kind of things. So with anyone starting a program, the sessions have to be planned by someone that knows what they're doing. And I'd be looking at what you've had a go at in the past and then sort of progressing on from that. And another good tempo run could be something at heart rate. So if you know your heart rate zones, you could do sort of a 20-minute progression run where you're starting nice and easy and then you're gradually getting harder. And you might run to a 180 pulse. It's very hard to say. It depends on your age, depends on all your zones, depends on the weather. Depends if you're tired, but that could work for you as well. So there's so many different sessions. You could do fartlek sessions as well, something like that, 3-minute, 2-minute, 1-minute, 2-minute, 3-minute session with equal flow recoveries, where the 3-minute efforts are about half marathon pace and then all the other efforts are a little bit faster. And float recoveries are good because they're slightly faster than slow jogging, so they just keep your heart rate up. So that's another good addition to an interval session early in the week. A good thing to do for a 5K runner is a mile time trial or something very hard, flat out, or 2 times a K flat out with 10 minutes rest, and then maybe a light tempo run. So you're practicing running faster than your race pace with heaps of rest, so you're recovering, but you might feel a bit lactic in those efforts. And sometimes the 5K can make you feel like that. So you need to do some of that work. You just can't do that every week, but that's really good training as well for 5K. You're training for the half marathon or 10K and you're an advanced runner, for your interval session, you could do something like 3 to 4 times 1,500 metres or a mile. And you might run a couple of these at half marathon pace to 10K pace and then a couple at 10K pace. So really focusing on a few of the reps to be a bit faster. That's often a pretty good session for people to do. There's so many different interval sessions. You could do 30 minutes fartlek with a minute on, minute off. That's 10K at a half marathon pace. So you go a minute at pace and then a minute relaxed. Those sessions, you build up to them. So that's quite a high volume session, but anything up to 20 to 30 minutes of hard running is probably where you're looking at. I always like sessions, like if you're on the track, sometimes I like odd distance sessions like 7 times 700 metres or 8 times 700 metres or 9 times 700 metres, depending where you're at. with a 100-metre jog recovery and with varying the paces around as well. So they could be varying between sort of 5K, 10K pace. So some of them a bit faster, some of them a bit slower. But the recovery is very slow jog recovery. Or another session could be a 2K effort at half marathon pace, some 400s or 300s, closer to 5K pace, or even 200. So you could do a 2K, reps of 2 or 300s much faster, then a 2K, then reps of 2 or 300s much faster again. So you're always having a lap jog recovery in between the efforts. They're really good sessions. Tempo runs, things like about 30 minutes of running. So you could do a progression run where every 10 minutes you're getting a little bit faster. So you could start more marathon pace, and then for the first 10 minutes, the second 10 minutes might be somewhere between marathon and half marathon pace, and then your last 10 minutes might be slightly quicker. Progression runs are good because it teaches people how to control their pace, and a lot of people can't go slow enough at the start of sessions, and that's what we've got to do in races. So if you're on a half marathon and your pace is 4:15 per K, so you want to run a 90-minute half marathon, you might start off and you feel like you're feeling really good, so you want to do 4:05 and you want to start at 4:05, and then you blow up at 15K. So you've got to really practice holding back at the start, and it's really important that you use some of these sessions to practice that feeling, but then finish the sessions faster than your goal pace for, say, the half marathon. So if you're aiming to run a 90-minute half marathon at 4:15 pace, you've got to do some sessions where you're finishing at 4:05 pace or something like that. So you're practicing finishing faster than race pace, but you might start at 4:25 pace in some of these tempo runs, or 4:30 pace or 4:40 pace. I always like to schedule in paces for people. A good session could be something like 3 times 9 minutes or 4 times 9 minutes with 1 minute easy. And so you're changing paces within the 9 minutes. So you might have 3 minutes at half marathon pace, 3 minutes slightly quicker, 3 minutes at half marathon pace, and then 1 minute easy, and then you do that again. So you just vary those paces around within your session. And then the long run, it can be 2 hours if you're advanced. Generally, if you're training for a half marathon, your long run generally should be probably a little bit longer than the race will take you. So if you're aiming to run a 90-minute half marathon, you should do a long run that's a little bit longer than that. So you don't necessarily have to cover a half marathon every long run, but maybe if you want to do that, you should be doing sort of long runs for about an hour 45. But if you're a 10K runner and you've never done a half before, you've just got to be really careful with where you're at with the long runs. And anyone that I coach, I look at what they've done in the past. So you can't go from doing a 45-minute long run to a 2-hour long run within a week. That's not good progression, and that will get you injured. So everything has to be gradual. So if you're up to running 70 minutes as your long run, you just gradually add on 10 minutes each week till you're up to an hour 40 or something like that. Some people will run 2 hours, and they've been doing that for a while, so they're used to it. So that's a really good session to make sure you're getting in that easy long run. And then for advanced people, they might do a medium length run the day or 2 days after their interval session. And that could be 50 to 70 minutes or so. It could be 80 minutes, just depending on the person and where they're at. So an easy run shouldn't be structured. It should just be something that you can enjoy, where you're not pushing the pace and you're feeling easy. If you feel like you're really tired from the day before, back off the pace. Or some people that I work with, they might be a bit sore from the session the day before, so their easy run is elliptical instead of running. So you've got to be really smart with those easy runs and just make sure that you keep them easy and you don't overdo stuff. But yeah, it's very important to go easy on the easy run. So look, if you're aiming to run a 90-minute half marathon and 4:15 is your pace, your easy runs should be slower than 5-minute pace. So, you've just got to make sure that they're a lot slower than what you're aiming to run in your race. With the marathon, it's got to be a gradual build. So first of all, with the long runs, I would use in a prep my longest run, 34 to 38K. So you don't need to run a marathon to do marathons. And then there might be a couple of runs that are between 32 and 34K, and then all the others are sort of 30K or less. And some weeks they're easy, but some weeks you can bring in specific elements to that long run. For an example, say if you're trying to break 3 hours for the marathon so that your pace is 4:15, you've got to practice running at 4:15 for a long period of time. So to bring into the long run, you could bring in 5 times 3K efforts with a 1K float, where you're running those 3K efforts, some a little bit slower than marathon pace, some right on marathon pace, some slightly quicker. And then that 1K float, that might be, if you're training to break 3 hours, that might be sort of 4:30 pace for the float. So a little bit slower than marathon pace, but still not slow jogging. So when you build that into your program, that week you'd only do one other harder session. So usually interval sessions every week, and interval sessions for marathon prep are similar to 10K and half marathon. I think mile reps are good, 1,500 meter reps, K reps. Things like fartlegs are good. They could be like, I've got a 34-minute fartleg that goes 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1 of efforts with equal float recovery. So that gets you working, and it's a good way to play around with your speed. Your fastest efforts are probably about half marathon pace, but keeping those recoveries moving. But it's a good one to switch off a little bit too and not be so focused on specific distances and paces as well. So throwing in fartlegs is good for the interval sessions, but I do like a lot of the sessions that are just bread and butter of anyone's training, and they're those K reps and things like that. So K reps could be anything from 6 to 9 reps or so, and you've just got to look at the volume of intensity there. So some people can handle 8 to 10K of reps as their interval session, whereas other people are more like 6 to 8K of reps as their session. So you just play around with that volume, and then you can sort of make up the session to suit. But even in marathon prep, I often throw in a session that might be a longer warm-up, so 40 to 50-minute warm-up, and then some short hills at a 5K pace feel or so. It is good to have an interval session sometimes with that longer warm-up because you're practicing running faster on tired legs. So sometimes I throw in a session like that into a prep. And then those tempo runs, so if you're not doing any harder running in your long run and you just run an easy long run, on weeks like that, the tempo run, you can do that more at half marathon pace. That could be back to similar tempos from 10K half marathon sort of training, like 9-minute efforts, could be 3K efforts, could be 2K efforts, could be a K on, a K off. So it could be something like 8K where you're running a K at half marathon pace or slightly quicker, and then a K float. So you're sort of varying between, and the float's faster than jogging, but not as fast as the effort you're doing. So you're sort of varying between that. That's probably the key programs in a marathon block. And then some sort of specific effort would be like a half marathon within the block. So that's really important, just to get in a race situation or a 20K effort on the road, just have a bit of a hit out. And you go a bit easier that week in training. So just remember, in marathon training, the volume doesn't have to keep going up, and then taper. You could have 1 week where the volume's a bit down because you're having a race or something like that, which is completely fine. Marathon runners all over the world do it, and it just helps your body sort of recover, and it just really decreases the chance of overtraining in that critical period when you're sort of about 5 weeks out. It is really cool to track how you're going with your watch and with your paces. I've got the Polar Watch here. We do use it a fair bit in training, and everyone I coach, I give them specific paces because you can't just train for a marathon and want a certain goal and not be looking at the pace of what you're training for. And it's actually really fun. It makes sessions tick by when you're looking at pace, even for the floats in session. So it's really cool to have that and just stop you running too fast too. It's not always about running hard, but it's good to have technology just to help you when you need to ease off as well. I think a key thing is getting enough sleep and rest. It's not something that you can buy. Sleep's such an important part of a program, and sometimes people get in a bit of a hole and you ask them what's been going on in their life, and they might have been moving house, or they might have started a new job, or they've had stressful situations in their life and they're not getting as much sleep. And that can really impact the quality of your sessions and how you're feeling from day to day in a program. So really make sure you go to bed at the same time each night, especially in those 12 weeks of that build phase when you're getting really focused before your race, and make sure you're doing as much as you can to catch up on sleep, even if you have a bit of a nap on the weekend, if you've got time to do that. But sleep is really important, and it's a really big recovery tool that a lot of people don't think about because it's so simple. I think the last tip would be, if you've got those super shoes, a lot of people have them. I didn't have them when I was an athlete. I've actually never tried them, but just really try not to use them all the time. Maybe do a couple of sessions in them, but save them for race day, because you always want to save like your best gear and that extra little energy and excitement for race day. So don't do every session in those shoes. It's really important just to make sure that race day is the pinnacle of what you're training for, and that should be when you get everything that you can to get the best result. So yeah, and just practicing nutrition. So in our sessions with Lace Up Running before, say, Village Roadshow, Theme Parks, Gold Coast Marathon, we would do specific long runs. So that's long runs with some marathon paced efforts every few weeks, and practicing taking drinks off a table, taking gels, practicing what you're going to do on race day. Because if you haven't practiced that sort of stuff in a race and then you get into those marathons and everything's there and you just say, okay, I'm just going to do this, you don't know if it's going to work. So you really need to practice your plan in quite a few of those harder long runs. So not just long runs when you're going easy, but you need to practice them in long runs where you're running at your marathon pace. And sometimes some gels that you think you want to use, you can't stomach them when you're running hard too. So you need to sort of learn what's going to be good for you. And some people like to have caffeine, other people find it upsets their stomach. So there's so many different things that you need to practice and learn what you need well before race day.
Thank you so much, Benita, for all of your pro tips. There's so much there that we can take away straight into our running. As we mentioned, for many decades, we've been collecting feedback from runners. What I'd like to do now is pass you across to John, our local sports scientist, to have a look at how as runners we can overcome the top 5 most common running challenges and how we're also doing that with technology.
Great, thanks Ross. So over the past 40 years, Polar have fielded thousands of questions and logged countless hours from runners training and racing across the globe. The top 5 running challenges that we've continued to respond to are: how can we set up a safe and effective training program? How can we get started with heart rate zones? Or how can heart rate training help me? How can I get started with pace zones? How can I get the most out of a training session and ensure that the training session meets the goals that I have set forth in the training plan? And how can I manage my training load to avoid or minimize the risk of injury and illness? What we're going to do now over the next couple of minutes is take you through how we can solve these issues. So firstly, how do we create a unique running program that's suitable for you? Polar's online web service and mobile app, Polar Flow, is your window into your training, activity, sleep, and recovery data. You're able to create a free running program for events ranging from 5, 10, 21 to 42K. Now, these programs have been developed by Polar's running coaches and sports scientists and are built to be customized to match your specific starting point. You simply input your personal stats, how many days you plan to train, select your current estimated fitness level from the list, and importantly, your start date for the program and your target race date, and the program will be generated consisting of a base, build, and taper phases that Benita has so brilliantly covered earlier, so you can start to progress safely and effectively. Whether you have a Polar device or not, these programs are free to generate within the Polar Flow web service. Okay, fantastic. So we have a program ready to go. Now, a common question next would be, how could I use heart rate training to improve the effectiveness of the program? Well, the first thing we must do is calculate or estimate your maximum heart rate. And we can do this most accurately with a maximal test to exhaustion, not recommended when you first start your program. So we use the common formula of 220 minus your current age. And this number would represent your maximum heart rate, from which we can calculate your heart rate zones. Now, this is done automatically if you have a Polar watch once you add in your date of birth. So we can see that these heart rate zones are anchored to your unique maximum heart rate number. Now, there are various formulas for predicting your maximum heart rate. 220 minus your age is a good starting point, but we would like to be a little bit more accurate than that. And the beauty of having a Polar watch with best in market accuracy heart rate measurement technology is anytime you reach your new maximum heart rate in any training session, your maximum heart rate number and heart rate zones will be updated automatically. Now, we've heard Benita mention that it's critical that you execute your training plan based on the zones that are unique to you and your current fitness level and not someone else's program. And here we can see the heart rate zones for a person of 43 years of age. And simply, the zones are based on percentages of the maximum heart rate. So 50 to 60% of the maximum heart rate is zone 1, 60 to 70% is zone 2, and so on and so forth. We also have a subjective descriptor of what you should feel like when you're conducting or training in these heart rate zones. So, for example, training in heart rate zone 1 should feel easy, fun, you could do it all day. And conversely, training in heart rate zone 5, 90 to 100%, should feel completely unsustainable. You would not be able to do it for very long at all. You would not be able to talk to anyone while you're doing it. And these zones are important because spending time different intensities or different heart rate zones helps to develop different physiological systems within the body. For example, the base phase of your program, the goal would be to develop the oxidative energy pathway or the aerobic energy system. And we do that by spending time in zones 1, 2, and 3. So the zones are ways of controlling your intensity such that you are developing the correct energy pathways within the body according to your program to help you maximize the effectiveness of the program. So if you do have a Polar watch, your running program will be automatically synced to your watch, and the sessions will be there for you to start, and you will be guided through the sessions on the fly, in that the watch will give you the target heart rate zone and therefore pace. And not only that, it will prompt you when you fall outside of the target heart rate zone. So if your heart rate is starting to get too high, perhaps you're on an easy run in zones 1 to 2 and your heart rate is creeping up into zone 3, you will receive an audible beep from your watch prompting you to slow your pace and bring your intensity down into the correct zone. We can also assign pace and speed zones in much the same way that we assigned the heart rate zones. But to improve the accuracy of these zones, considering that we did use a prediction equation to assign the maximum heart rate, within your Polar running watch there is a built-in guided running performance test, which once complete will return a VO2 max score, an actual maximum heart rate score from which your heart rate zones will be updated automatically, and also speed and pace zones. And this will allow you to improve the accuracy and therefore effectiveness of your heart rate and pace guided training sessions. And now we're up and running with the program. 2 accurate heart rate and pace zones, ensuring that we're training effectively towards the specific goals of the current phase of the program. We can also use these zones to monitor the progress of your training, in that you can see as your running performance improves, at a glance on your watch you will see a gradual increase over time in your running pace for any given heart rate. You will also receive feedback and predicted race times based on your training session data collected from your Polar running watch, allowing you to really get a handle on your achievable running paces for various distances and events. I do hope that this information has answered some questions, or at least cleared up some confusion for you on how technology can be an addition to your training program. Of course, consistent training is the cake, by and large. We might think of this just as the icing or the sprinkles on the cake. If you do have any questions, please be in touch with myself or anyone from the Polar team. Thank you very much for having me and listening to me. And with that, I'll pass back on over to Ross.
We would like to take a moment to ask everyone to pass on a huge thank you to Benita for sharing her running expertise with us. Without her time and support, a lot of the content we've enjoyed today simply wouldn't have been possible. Hopefully, you've heard what an experienced running coach has to offer. As we mentioned, Benita is director and one of the coaches at Lace Up Running. If you feel you need to take a great step forward with a personal running coach, please click the link on the screen or visit the Lace Up Running website, as they only have 10 coaching spots left and they are filling up fast. If you would like to get your hands on a Polar running program, there's a couple of really great options. As John mentioned, you can jump on to register for Polar Flow, and there you can create your own individualized running program. So based on your own starting point, how many days a week you can train and your starting intensity, you can get individual workouts for all of the phases that Benita took us through. So the base phase, the build, and the taper. Really importantly, if you are looking to target something like the Gold Coast Marathon races and the events that are around that, we do include safe build-up times. So if you are looking at the 42K or the half marathon, you've only got about a week to do that registration. Otherwise, you won't be able to create that program, because what we're saying is that you just won't have enough safe training time in the lead up for that and pushing too hard, which might cause injury. So really important to take that action. However, if you would like another great way, you can sign up for the Polar Running Club. And there we're going to have some new running plans coming out for the 5K, so for beginners and intermediate, and also the 10K, the half marathon and the marathon. So these will include, again, all of those sessions and phases, but also they'll have links to our video workouts for strength, mobility and core exercises. So as you're gradually building your mileage, you can actually get access to those exercises to get stronger as well. If you do join, you will also go in the running to win a new running watch every month. So again, click the link there. That's a really fantastic resource. We wanted to take a moment to introduce our expert for the next session on Wednesday, the 30th of March. If you've been training really hard and just getting frustrated by not seeing the results that you're after, or if you feel that no matter what, you're running towards an injury, or if you're looking to put a really big investment into your upcoming training and just don't want that derailed before race time, then this is a really key session to tune into. Brad Bear is the founder of Pogo Physio and simply one of the leading specialists in managing injury, recovery, and performance for runners. If you've already signed up for the series, then you'll get the alerts for Brad's session in your inbox. But if you do have a running colleague who might be interested, it would be great if you could give this a share. Thank you so much for tuning into the Polar Virtual Running Clinics. If you haven't done so, do make sure you check out the rest of the webinar series, as we'll be bringing you great content to help your running across running plans, recovery, nutrition, tapering, racing, and much more.